Hey, good morning. Chad with the Word and Coffee. We're going to be in Genesis 10 and 11 today. 10 is mainly genealogy, and there's still some stuff to find there, um, but a lot of it has to do with begets. We're going to move from 10 and into 11, and we'll go from there and kind of, like I said, just kind of see where the Lord leads us. So anyway, chapter 10, verse 1 starts off with the records of um, of the generations of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So anyway, these were the three sons of Noah, and I think something I do want to at least point out here. We had just talked about the fact that back here in 9, um, there was the sin where Canaan, which is Ham's son, had been cursed. And then we get here, and we still see that God includes the names, the genealogy of Ham. A lot of times when someone was cursed, a lot of times when someone was not in good standing where they needed to be, God didn't necessarily honor them by giving us the idea of their line, their lineage, but he did tell us about Ham and his descendants, and so he gave us all that. For a long time, there was some misinterpretation of the Bible, and purposefully, and it was more of a justification, um, where Ham was looked at as being the father of the people who were in the nation of Africa. And when he was cursed and was told that your descendants are going to be slaves, and they're going to serve your brother's children and descendants, a lot of people back in the time of slavery in the United States, and at other times throughout history, have used that verse, that passage, to justify slavery, and that's not even remotely close to being truth. If you read on into Exodus, the curses generally only went 3 to 4 generations, unless it was said that from this point forward, I'm going to cut your line off or something like that. And Ham also, wound up being the father of a couple of different um, nations. Ethiopia, of course, but then you had Egypt, Libya, some places that aren't necessarily associated with having, people that came out that were slaves that served. So that being said, there was definitely a curse, and God followed through on his curse, of course. But the idea that we can justify slavery through that passage is kind of a ridiculous one when it comes right down to it. So anyway, we go all the way down through the lineage of Noah's family, and through the different sons, and Shem being the godly line, as we talked about yesterday. And it gives us all of the different people that were born to them. And so that's what we have in chapter 10. And I'm not going to read all that. For one thing, I don't know if I can pronounce a lot of these names. But secondly, um, it's something that just to sit and read, and the two sons were born to Ebner, and the name of one was Peleg, and the days of the earth was divided. Those are things that are in there, and it's important. It's terribly important. God wouldn't have included it if it wasn't important. But for our purposes, we're just gonna kind of go through that and summarize that these are giving us the names and the lineage of the sons of Noah and their families. Moving into chapter 11, we get to the Tower of Babel. And this is an interesting story. I've always thought it was. I'm going to read some of this, starting in verse 1 of chapter 11. Now, the whole earth used the same language and the same words. And it came about as they journeyed east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they used brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. And they said, Come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven, and let us make for ourselves a name, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, Behold, they are one people, and they all have the same language. And this is what they began to do, and now nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another. And so the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the whole face of the earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore, its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the whole face of the earth. Now, there's a couple of things that are kind of interesting here that that I've noticed through reading, and going back up here to verse 2, and it came about as they journeyed east. You know, Cain, when he was when Adam and Eve were taken out of the Garden of Eden, they were moved east. Then when Cain came out of the murder of Abel, he was moved east. Now they're moving east. I think that this language is interesting in the fact that as they move east, they're getting further and further and further away from the original Garden of Eden. Now, of course, the flood's taken place and the ark is landed, and we don't know where that would have been in relation. The whole geography of the earth, like we said, we feel like it's totally changed. So we don't know where the Garden of Eden was, but it does keep talking about moving east. And the further east that they moved, I think that it's language that shows us that they're moving away from God, and that when you see that here, you've seen it already, that Adam and Eve were removed to the east, then Cain went to the east, and now they've moved from the ark to the east. So, that all being said, they decided to do these things. They were going to build this great city. And I remember when I was a kid and they talked about, I would hear this story, I thought they were trying to build a tower that got all the way up to where God was. I don't think that was necessarily the case. They just wanted to build this big, tall building to say, look how great we are. Look and see, how wonderful we are. And that's, I think, what was being done here. As a matter of fact, and they said to one another in verse 3, Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they used brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. And they said, Come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven, and let us make for ourselves a name, lest we be scattered over the whole face of the earth. So they became very egocentric, very self-centered. Just yesterday, we were reading about how, or day before, I can't remember now, but anyway, how we were reading about Noah didn't even come out of the ark until God told him to. I think it was a couple of days ago, yeah. He didn't come out of the ark until God told him to. Even though he had already sent out the raven and the dove to see, if it was okay to come out, he still waited for instruction. He was still putting the emphasis on, I'm going to do what God tells me to do. But here we are, shortly thereafter, and we've already got men saying to one another, Come, let us make bricks. And then, let us do this, let us do that, let us build for ourselves a city, and let us build a tower. And it became all about man. And, God said, this has already happened once. Everything that went on in the time after Adam and Eve were in the garden led up to me destroying the earth. We're not going to let that happen again. And if these people stay together, that's what's going to happen. So he went down and confused their language. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting to me is, um, there's all these different accounts of a flood that you get all over the world, and from all these different people, and from all these different cultures, they have an account of a flood, but it's all a little bit different. It doesn't exactly match with the Bible, of course, but this has been passed down from generation to generation to generation throughout, hundreds of different cultures throughout the earth. And also, we have pyramids that are built all over the place, in South and Central America, in the United States, all over northern Africa and into the continent of Africa, the subcontinent, and in China and different places. We have these pyramids of one type or another. And it seems to me that, well, this is what they were doing when God came and scattered them. And, what would have happened? These people, they might have decided, well, hey, we can't do it with the whole world, but these people that are like us, that came with us, maybe we're going to get together and we're going to build a pyramid, and we're going to do the things that we were doing before. Or they had this oral tradition passed down to them that said this is what was going on. And then we couldn't understand these other people, so we left and went this way. And in doing so, we decided we were going to build a pyramid, something like the Tower of Babel probably was going to be, with a large base, and then moving up and having a very stable base to start from. So anyway, I think that's kind of a point that's interesting. The other thing is, what did God tell Noah and his sons? We talked about it 3 times. He had told Adam and Eve, then he told Noah and his sons twice, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth. Well, if you're going to just stay in one little spot, you're not really going to fill the earth. And that's what these guys started to do. They moved to the east. They started one big city. They're going to make this huge city that's going to be where pretty much everybody is. So they're not following the command of the Lord. He's telling them, hey, go out, subdue the whole world, and be fruitful and multiply over the earth and fill it. And that's not what they're doing. Once again, they started out with disobeying God, so he had to come and he had to make sure that they were going to do what they were going to do, and he used the mechanism of confusing their languages and making it so that they didn't understand one another. And it creates strife. There's not that many wars that have happened throughout history, other than, of course, civil wars, where nations don't go to war against other nations that speak the same language a lot of times. Now, of course, it happened. The Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, with Britain and the United States, and there have been examples, obviously, but so many times when you have countries fighting with one another, language can be a barrier sometimes that creates confusion, especially in ancient times and up through through times just not that long ago, where maybe there wasn't the understanding between nations and between languages that there is now, the ability for us to interpret. So anyway, I find those things to be really interesting. And then from 11, after the Tower of Babel and everything happens there, then we go into the descendants of Shem. Shem, being the godly line, is then going into a little more detail after Japheth and Ham are kind of left behind over here in chapter 10. We get to chapter 11 and we go into the descendants of Shem, and it goes into what happened, who was who, and it gets down to Terah. And from there we know that Terah had a few sons. He had 3 sons: Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. And of course, the important one out of that is Abraham, or Abram. And so we get to see our first look at the patriarchs here, and this is where the nation of Israel kind of really got started. And we'll get into more of that tomorrow in chapter 12. We'll start to look at Abram and his journey of faith. So anyway, once again, amazing to see the gospel story. Not just my wife and I were talking yesterday, and she used the term that she had heard a lot of times. There was a scarlet thread all the way through the Bible that was the gospel. And we were talking about the fact that that's not even remotely accurate. That everything is about the gospel. It's not a thread. It's the entire fabric of our Word of God. It's the gospel, and we see the provisions that are being made, and and what's happening. And the nation of Israel is about to be created in order that there will be a blessing for the whole world out of that nation. And so God had this plan, and it's laid out. The architecture of the Bible gives us the plan that He had set into place, and it's just a wonderful picture that we get to look at, and we get to see as we read through the Scriptures. So you guys have a great day. See you tomorrow.